Hey everybody, Sayre at Nova Motorcycles again. This week we're back with another vintage superbike story. This is a T150 Triumph Trident. If you've watched some of our other videos, you've seen this bike before. It's back for a little bit of a follow-up. But let's talk about the Trident. This model in particular is mostly in 1970. The tank color has me a little off. That's, I think, a 73 color. But the rest of it is a 1970, so I'm going to talk about it as if it's a 1970. This is a three-cylinder motorcycle, 750 cc's. It was introduced in 1968 is when the model came out. Sadly, it was actually ready to go in about 1965, and had it come out in 65, it could have been a game changer for the Brits. The stories of why it didn't have to do with management and style and a lot of arrogance on behalf of the British company owners who didn't think the Japanese were going to catch up as fast as they did. So when they did launch it in 1968, it was briefly the fastest production bike in the world, briefly a bike that everybody wanted, and 6 months later, the Honda CB750 came out, and suddenly nobody wanted this anymore. The reasons why you didn't is that it's a pushrod, 4-speed, air-cooled motorcycle, whereas the Honda, while it was still air-cooled, was an overhead cam, 5-speed thing with an electric starter that didn't leak oil. These still leaked oil. These were very old design. I mean, the basic design of how they came up with it is they took a 500cc Triumph Twin and they grafted a center section onto it, made their own crankshaft for it, uses 500cc pistons. They basically made it from mostly stuff they already had. So it was really designed by the designers as a stopgap measure to sort of get them into the next generation. But the management of the company said, well, that's good enough. We'll just throw that out there. And that's all we're going to do. Sadly, it wasn't really enough. But that being said, they're cool bikes. If you've ever ridden a 3-cylinder, 4-stroke motorcycle, they really do a lot that other bikes don't do. They have a lot of torque, much like a twin or a single. But unlike a twin or a single, which starts to run out of juice, they rev way up and they scream and they howl. Sound like a real superbike, like a modern 4-cylinder Japanese motorcycle, for example. These had a lot of success in racing. They made them in 2 versions, but at this point, BSA and Triumph were essentially the same company. BSA made what they call the A75, and it was mostly identical, although the cases were a little different and the cylinders were tilted forward a little bit. That bike actually won Daytona in 71, I think, 71 or 70. Someone's going to catch me on that. One of those years Honda won, the other year BSA won, and I can't keep them straight. But anyway, they were actually very successful in racing, still are really popular in classic racing because despite their inherent old technology, they can be tuned to go really well. And the 3-cylinder really gives it a lot of advantage against other bikes on the track that they can really exploit. Let's see, the basics of this guy, I think as I mentioned before, it's a 4-speed. They did introduce in 1971 the 5-speed, which certainly helped it. This thing came with drum brakes, which by 1970 were a little bit dated. The Honda in 69, CB750 Honda, came out with a disc brake. So this was definitely long in the tooth. They did end up putting a disc brake on the Triumph eventually. But at this stage of the game, Triumph and BSA and Norton, they were still really kind of playing catch-up. They kind of got caught with their pants down by the Honda 750 and then in 71 by the Kawasaki Z1. So they were putting out these things, but they really just couldn't stand up to what the Japanese were doing, which had much better tech into it in them, and were sold at a much better price point. So this is sort of the end of the British Empire, so to speak. This and the Norton Commando were really the last, quote, new things to come out of the UK as far as motorcycles go, until really like the 90s. Norton rotary people, don't get started on me. That's a side project. But in any real sense, this was the end until John Bloor took over the Triumph name and restarted them in the 90s as a basically new company, different bikes completely. So they have their charms. They were the last of a line. They certainly have their faults, but like any Brit thing, if you give them enough energy, they pay you back, and they're fun, and there's really nothing else like them. So yeah, if you have any interesting stories about these, and again, this era of superbike time, the late 60s into the early 70s, any bikes in that era, love talking about that. So chime in with that, and thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.